Hey, everybody. Hey, Carrie, how
Hey,
are you?
hi Nev. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing fabulous, to be honest with you. It's, how hard of a winter it's been?
I do. For you, it's been
It's been nuts. Not only has it been super cold, it has been the snowiest year that I can ever remember in my life. So it's like 80, above 80 today. So
wow.
yeah, it's going to be like 85 tomorrow and the next day.
That's great.
Feels like summer. We went from winter.
Woo.
We had a blizzard a week and a half ago to summer.
Wow. It's still kind of in between. We're having a little bit of a spring here, but it was 90 a week or two ago, but it's down cooler again. Anyway,
Yeah. Hey, we're having trouble streaming to Rumble, it says. So
okay.
uh I need to update something to make it show up on Rumble.
Okay.
Let me do that real quick. Um I am not sure
That always happens, by the way.
what.
Well, it should work on the computer, but it doesn't work on the TV when I've had it on the TV. But you're right. It's not on the my computer either because I
Oh,
have.
it's not? Okay, so I have to figure this out. We're having technical difficulties. Sorry about that. I need to go into StreamYard and probably update the Rumble, the Rumble settings. And I actually want to do that because most folks are watching us on Rumble. So we'll be a little bit delayed here. Um,
Hmm.
And I think it's my fault. So I think I didn't update our Rumble info correctly. So I'm doing that now.
Okay.
All right. So I'm hoping that it's going to show up on Rumble now. Let me refresh and have a look see.
Okay.
It still shows as.
Oh shoot.
No, that's okay. No, it's still showing our. Um. Okay, so I think I did update it, and I might have to just create a new live stream on Rumble and let folks know about that.
Oh,
That stinks. Yeah, it says it's waiting for stream, so we may have to just upload it to Rumble after, and let's just go for it.
okay.
All right. So should we get started?
Yes.
First topic, we are going to talk about the Fed today. It's a big, big topic. We could probably have 20 shows on it.
Yes.
Yeah, we could have a lot of shows on it. So, with that, we have a lot of different questions we're going to be asking, and we're going to kind of do a different format tonight, and it will be more of a roundtable format. And with that, we'll start with our first question on whose idea was it to form the Fed. So, Carrie, what do you have?
Well, I have the plans that were put forth to Congress. The Aldrich plan that was put forth by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was the grandfather of Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller, and also the Wall Street plan, which was put forth by Paul Warburg, who was a German banker acting on behalf of Baron Alfred Rothschild. So, I mean, there's other conspirators, if we call them that, but they're all bankers behind it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we had our own Secretary of the Treasury, the president of the National City Bank of New York, senior partner at JP Morgan, the president of First National Bank of New York, a vice president at another bank, a partner in Kuhn and Loeb, that was Paul Warburg, all bankers.
Yep. A lot of bankers.
What have you got, Nevs?
So I did some digging into one of the folks who really was a driver for creating the Fed, and it was Senator Nelson Aldrich. So he has a really interesting history. He married Rockefeller, and then prior to getting into politics, he went on a 5-month tour of Europe, which is really interesting. Right before he got into politics, he spent 5 months in Europe, which is very curious.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same, then he got into politics right after that, and at the same time he got into politics, he became a banking director at a bank. So it's like there are no coincidences. And who did he talk to in Europe?
Right.
You know, Europe already had central banks in place.
Mm-hmm.
And when he first started in politics, he started at the local level, and then he went to the state, and he became the Speaker of the House
Mm-hmm.
in his state. And then in 1811, he went to the Senate, and he served in the Senate for like 30 years. So he was like a lifetime politician.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is he also was on the Senate Finance Committee.
Mm-hmm.
So I just found it very curious, because not only is he married to a Rockefeller, why did he go to Europe? And he was one of the 6 that
Yeah.
that formed the Fed. So I just found it interesting. I didn't have a lot of time to dig more. I'm kind of really curious to learn more about Senator Aldrich. So he's from Rhode Island too. So
I think it's pretty easy to put together that he was a tool of the bankers.
you think he was a tool, or do you think he was a driver? I don't know.
He was a tool. I think that the money people behind the scenes were the drivers.
That's very, very true. Very, very true. So, yeah, go ahead.
A lot of people, I mean, Congress didn't really take to it very well. And the thing is both plans were virtually the same. There was like one small little thing that was different, but they were the same. It's like, you know, Democrat, Republican, oh, you have a choice, really? Or is it the unit party? But anyway, similar kind of thing. But
he was the one who suggested that we have a Federal Reserve, from what I read.
Aldrich?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they put him forward for sure to do that. But it is interesting. It'd be worth looking into further. But I found a lot of quotes. I'm going to share a lot tonight. But Charles Lindbergh was, he summed it up really well. He said, the Aldrich plan is the Wall Street plan. It means another panic, if necessary, to intimidate people. Aldrich, paid by the government to represent the people, proposes a plan for the trusts, indeed. And then he also said the system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money. They know in advance when to create panics to their advantage. They also know when to stop panics. Inflation and deflation work equally well for them when they control finance. So those were some of his thoughts about
Yeah,
advice.
that's pretty interesting. Yeah, he actually served in the U.S. House of
Oh,
Representatives for only one term
yeah.
before he became senator. So it's like he moved up pretty quickly,
Mhm,
uh, and that's interesting too.
mhm.
So you kind of got into. I don't know if we should go into our next question because you touched on it just now when you were talking about uh, panic.
Mhm. Yeah.
So our next question is, why was the Fed created? So what do you got, Carrie?
Allegedly to create a stable financial system and to avoid bank panics like 1907, right? But this is what I discovered, that early in 1907, Jacob Schiff, who was not related to the Schiff we know,
Are
CEO
we
of,
sure?
I can't find that he is, but hey, it could. But so he was the CEO of Kuhn Loeb and Company, and he warned, unless we have a central bank with adequate control of credit resources, this country is going to undergo the most severe and far-reaching money panic in history. And so that was early in '07. And then in October later that year, JP Morgan set the panic in motion by circulating rumors that its rival, the Knickerbocker Bank and Trust, was insolvent. So chaos ensued. There was a huge drop in the stock exchange. The shares like 50%, 11% drop in industrial production the following year, rise in imports. It was a panic, and
Yeah.
it looks very much like a contrived boom and bust.
Contrive is the key word there.
Mhm, mhm.
Uh, yeah, there were actually several. Are you done? Sorry.
No, please, let's
I
converse.
was waiting for you to hand it off.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not
No,
used
no,
to
no.
our new way. Okay. What have you got, Nez?
Oh, what have I got? So um, there were several bank runs in
Mhm.
the past.
Oh, yeah.
But the 1907 one is very suspicious to me. It almost feels like, so this was the impetus for them having a reason to create the Fed,
Right,
was the 1907 panic.
right.
And for those who don't know, there was a huge run on the banks in 1907, and uh, who was it that had to step in and actually, let me share I'm going to share my screen a little bit
Okay.
for a minute here. Uh, so before I get into that, this is a supposed quote uh, that uh, Mayor Amschel Rothschild had, that is a spin-off of another quote from like the 15th century from an artist or poet, actually. But basically, what he says is to permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. Um, so one of the things I wanted to point to was, it just feels like there was some planning
Definitely.
done ahead of and some pushes for more of a central bank
Mhm.
ahead of the 1907 crash.
Right.
And I think our founding fathers and some folks in government kind of knew it uh, ahead of this. Or no, it was after, ahead of the Fed though. There was two tries to create a federal, like a centralized
Central
bank,
bank.
but we had national banks.
Mhm.
We had one that had a charter of 20 years, and the 20 years was up and it wasn't renewed, and then
Right.
the second one was created, but they actually had expiration dates, and it wasn't it wasn't permanent.
Right.
So So yeah, I feel like the 1907 crash was almost intentional, and it was J.P. Morgan Chase
Yeah.
who bailed out the banks at that time during the 1907 crash.
Hmm.
And uh, suddenly politicians are complaining, are we going to have to count on millionaires to bail us out? And so I do think the reason for creating the Fed was that crash. I think that was definitely the impetus.
It
And
absolutely.
yep.
It
So
definitely created the motivation and the pretext for it.
yeah. Should we talk about the timing of it? When was the Fed created? Carrie, what do you got?
December 23rd, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law. It was the Federal Reserve Act.
Yep.
And I mean, there are people I've read that he had questionable morals and, he was kind of an unethical man, but he was also uh, not a banker. And he had someone that I think this is Colonel House. Did you read about Colonel House? But
No, I haven't dug on that one.
yeah,
Who's
it was
that?
someone that was feeding him information that he thought he could trust. And um, that person, Colonel House, was definitely had an agenda for the bankers. And so, because we see later that Wilson did regret it, but some people, it's alleged that he was blackmailed even potentially.
Hmm.
But when it was before Congress, there was so much opposition that he threatened to keep them in session. I think it was Christmas Eve, like that they would miss their Christmas holiday, and the like there was not a majority that supported it. I think 43 supported it, 25 voted against, 27 refused to vote, and then 5 were absent.
Oh wow. See, I didn't dig into all that. That's
Yes.
interesting. Hmm.
So it was not popular. And I
Hmm.
just thought it was interesting too that, the whole reason was to, create financial stability, right? But
Hmm.
since its inception, we've had 19 recessions. The dollar has lost a lot of its purchasing power. I don't know the exact amount at this point. National debt is over 31 trillion. And then we have a bunch of unfunded liabilities. I think like 210 trillion, maybe more. Social Security, Medicare, the veterans, military benefits. So much for financial, stability of the monetary system,
Yeah,
right?
that's for sure. Yeah, 1913. It's a year to remember for sure. It started a lot. And I mentioned JP Morgan Chase bailed us out in the 1907 panic. It was actually him pulling uh, a bunch of other bankers in to agree to bail them out. But yeah, yep, 1913 is when it was created. And where was it created, Carrie? Where was the idea uh,
Ooh,
formed?
okay. There's a lot of
This is
intrigue with this, but
there is.
may I first share a quote that at the end of Woodrow Wilson's life, what
Yeah.
he said, because it's really very telling. He said, I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of
Ooh.
credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men.
Wow. So he admitted that, huh?
He did. Yes.
That is an amazing quote. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, that says it right there, right? I
Mhm.
mean, just lays it out. But yes, so where you probably know more about this than I do, but it was on Jekyll Island in Georgia. It was a place where the elite would go for holiday, and it was in secret. There were 6 men that represented the most powerful and wealthy um, families in the world, and it said they wore camouflage and used their first names because they didn't want the staff to know who they were. But it was in late November of 1910.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you got?
Yeah, I think they claim there was only 6 people who attended, and that, like, the Rockefellers and Rothschilds weren't there. But I question that, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I'll put my tinfoil hat on.
Okay. You'd think they'd want to be just to control it, right?
Yeah, I mean, they fact check that so much that it makes me think that there were more people there. But yes, I didn't do a huge dig on Jekyll Island itself. I mean, we all know it was a secret meeting. It was hush hush. They said they were going, I think, on a golfing trip or something. Um, and I don't remember who owned uh, the location of where they went on Jekyll Island at the time. It was one of the bankers. And yeah, so they pretty much stayed there until they came up with a plan. And honestly, so in that plan was presented to Congress as an official bill to be presented.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know, I did do a little digging, and the original plan is not what we went with, but most of what they wanted uh, was agreed to and put in the bill, which actually shocks me because our Constitution says that Congress is supposed to be over our money.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave that up through a bill. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's unconstitutional. And Andrew Jackson, he really was against any kind of centralized banking. He said it's unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. He squashed the idea almost 100 years earlier, or 80 years earlier. Mm-hmm. Actually, I have this up here. This is a cartoon from, when was it? 1833 or 1836 or something. But this is him rescuing us from the evil, the evil folks who are trying to take over our money. The many-headed monster, General Jackson slaying the many-headed monster.
Wow. Well, I think his what he ran on was vote Jackson, no bank. Really simple. No
Something
bank.
like that. Yeah. It was yeah, and that was a fight actually that he had as a part of the campaign that they were running for president. Mm-hmm. And who was he running against that was totally for centralizing the banking?
Oh,
I can't.
I don't can't think it off the top.
Was it Madison, or I don't remember.
Well, I know that
I read it, but it didn't retain in my head. I'm aging.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm going to find out. But I think that as far as when you say, like, why did they just relinquish that power that they were given by our Constitution? And, there's a lot of interesting history that goes back to colonial times where, people.
Here, I'm going to move to the history. Okay, now we're on the history. What do you got, Carrie?
I'm still trying to find who he ran against. Is somebody
back. You're talking about the colonial times?
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, our history, to really understand central banks, we need to look at the struggle that we've had as a people, as a nation, with the Rothschild bankers, the Bank of England. Let's face it. So the colonial period for the colonies, like in 1691, we had created our colonial script, which was free of interest, and prosperity and stable economic growth was achieved. So that was early. That was in the late 1600s. But then when you fast forward to 1763, Benjamin Franklin visits England and he's shocked by all the slums and the poverty.
Oh.
And I mean, it was just wretched. And so he goes to Parliament and they're like, can you explain why your source of prosperity? They were really confounded. And throughout the colonies, they were wondering how. And he replied, that is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. Oops. It is called colonial script. We issue it in proportion to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own money, we control its purchasing power and we have no interest to pay anyone.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that didn't go over well, obviously. And England's response the following year was to introduce the currency bill, which restricted the colonies the right to issue their own money. And they ordered them to issue bonds with interest and then sell them to the bank, like an exchange for English money, which is what we do now with the Treasury. So
Right.
it was going on back then. And then guess what our response was?
What?
It's like, I'm sure they were saying, those Americans. The Second Continental Congress, the very first task was to issue our own currency. So,
Yeah.
the ante is okay. And then England's response, they issued millions of dollars worth of counterfeit notes. And then within 2 years, it took a while. It did. It took about 2 years for it to finally affect our dollar's purchasing power. They did the same thing to France as well. They were trying to do their own. And so I know it's a bit long, but just, a little bit more of the history, unless you want to add something.
No, I'll hit my history after you're done with your history.
Okay. So before the war ended in 1783, we established our first central bank, so that was in 1782. So there was so much foreign money that poured into it that inflation surged. And the principal shareholder was none other than Mayer Amschel Rothschild.
The one I just gave the quote on.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason he doesn't care who makes the laws is because he can buy whomever or threaten or blackmail or whatever they do. Right.
Yeah.
But so Alexander Hamilton, who at the time was Secretary of Treasury, modeled the bank after the Bank of England. So it appears that they held sway over him. And Adams, Madison, Jefferson, and many others, Jefferson was the Secretary of State at the time, they all opposed it. And then the following year.
Speaking of Jefferson.
Yeah.
I have a quote from him too. So
okay.
I did do a dig and found out that information on Hamilton, how he wanted a national bank, but Jefferson, he didn't. But this is Jefferson's quote. I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies.
Yeah.
That's quite a statement right there.
Yeah. I mean, he was vehemently against
Yep.
it. And I mean, and there's reasons. So, so the following year, after all of this controversy, there was another crash. That was the Panic of 1792, and the Bank of England had flooded our market with cheap loans, and then suddenly called them in, and we didn't have the funds, so we had to sell shares to the bank, and as a result, our central bank became 100% privately owned. And 75% of the shares held by foreigners.
Yeah, I'm going to interject a little bit right here because there was a question in chat as to who owns the Fed, and is the Fed its own government? No, it's not its own government, and our federal government does not own it. It is privately owned by bankers, and they have a board of governors that I think there's 7 people that the president, whoever is the president at the time when their term is up, can appoint to the board of governors, and they serve, I think, 14-year terms. And then there's an additional 5 or 6 bankers, heads of banks that are also a part of the group that determines, not the board of governors, but well, maybe they are part of the board of governors, but they determine like decisions around monetary policy
Mhm.
and regulate. They write the regulations. They determine whether or not interest rates are going to go up or down based off of deflation or inflation.
Mhm.
They're supposed to keep everything stable.
Mhm.
But it is privately owned. It's privately owned by banks.
Mhm.
And
It's a private credit monopoly.
yeah, yeah. So I just wanted to answer that
Yeah.
question, because that was a really good question, because I think it can get confusing.
Yeah.
And it's also confusing. And then I'll hand it back to you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, go.
It's also confusing. Like, what's the difference between the Fed and the Treasury?
Mhm.
So they're completely separate entities. The Treasury is a part of the government, and they manage all of our money we spend and all of the money that comes in. And then what the Fed is responsible for is keeping the economy stable. They manage the supply of money in circulation, and they also set monetary regulations. Surprisingly, they're a private entity, privately owned, but they can set regulations.
Mhm.
I don't even know about that. Like, I can't even fathom that this bill passed, this Federal Reserve Act. Um, but anyway, I'll hand it back to you, and then I'll get into my history when you're done.
No, but it is fascinating, and I gotta admit, I'm a little embarrassed, but I didn't even realize until, I don't know, maybe it was about 7 years, maybe 8 years, that the Fed was not a government agency. It's embarrassing.
It's not embarrassing. I think everybody's confused by it. I did not know that my whole life either. You know, I didn't even start even caring about that kind of stuff until, you know, probably that long ago, right?
Well, and they made it look like a government agency because it took an act of Congress to pass. So it was kind of a little bit of a head fake on the American people, you know?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it's in Congress, they're voting on its passing. So, I guess it's easy to, get confused. But anyway, it was fun to look at what the press was saying at the
Mhm.
time regarding the central bank. This was during a time when they were actually doing their job, truth to power. They called it a great swindle, a vulture, viper, a cobra. You know, like
It's
people
true.
knew what it was, but yet they were still, wielding a lot of power. And so what was when Rothschild heard about all of the dissension in
Mhm.
Congress and just in the public, he declared, get this, quote, either the application for renewal of the charter is granted or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war. I will teach those impudent Americans a lesson and bring them back to colonial status.
Hmm. Interesting.
That was when it had expired. Okay, and that was 1811, the first charter,
Mhm.
and they refused to renew it. So War of 1812 was a year later.
Oh, yes, it was,
And it
wasn't
was
it?
between us and Great Britain.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's a really cool connection you just made there, Carrie.
It's just it's always like,
It
all the
always
wars are
is.
bankers' wars, aren't they?
Yep.
So, and
Um,
then I think I have a little bit more,
okay,
but just to keep us
go ahead.
through.
Just let me know when you're done.
So the battle raged on,
Mhm.
and then the second central bank was from 1816 to 1836, and there was an artificially induced recession in 1819 to 21, which is what inspired Andrew Jackson to run for president. Because they figured it out. And by the way, he survived an assassination attempt before he vetoed the bill to renew the central bank charter. They tried to kill him before he vetoed it.
Yeah.
So, and then he was a champion of the people. He collapsed the bank, paid off our national debt, and had 50 million surplus in the treasury.
So speaking of him collapsing the bank, you mind if I just interject?
Please.
It's really interesting what he did. So he was so against the banks. And so what he did was he threatened to and then did move all the federal deposits out.
Mm-hmm.
And he distributed those federal funds to multiple state banks. So without the federal funds, the national bank's operations they shrunk. And so he sort of forced the second national bank out of business. Mm-hmm. And it was good. It was really good. The bank, I think, what year did I show? It became the Pennsylvania State Chartered Bank in 1836 after it collapsed. Mm-hmm. So, and officially closed its doors in 1841. But it's really interesting that Andrew Jackson's just like, we're not having this. And I'm pulling all of our money out of here. Sorry. See ya. He was quite the president. Anyway, continue. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, I think that ends it, but
okay.
For 77 years, the next that followed, we were free of a central bank, but mm-hmm. I don't necessarily know if we were free of foreign influence, because they were always there with their money. So,
well, that's curious to me too. I don't understand how it's even allowed that our debt can go to foreign entities, but I don't get that. I haven't dug into that. I feel like that's super complex, and we need a finance expert on maybe to talk about that one day. It's kind of interesting, but
well, the central bankers are serving themselves and their foreign customers. That's mm-hmm. why. And it's not, they were not set up to serve the people, which they lied and said they were. That was what it was supposed to be, to serve us. It's not at all. They prey upon the people. It's slavery.
Yeah. Actually, I have a little clip of, before I get into I had a lot of the history you talked about, but I have a little bit more. Okay. But before I get into that, I have a little clip of someone kind of explaining how the Federal Reserve works, because I know it can be confusing, mm-hmm. but it's basically fake money. Mm-hmm. It's completely fake money. Mm-hmm. So before the Federal Reserve, like, we had to have our money backed by, we had notes, and there were, well, maybe I'll start getting into the history, but basically a lot of the state banks and other banks in the nation that weren't decentralized banks, mm-hmm. had their own notes. And basically they had to have that backed up by something tangible, mm-hmm. like gold, mm-hmm. right? And so they would issue notes to people, and people could use those notes to go out and purchase goods and whatnot. Mm-hmm. They could also go to the bank and say, I want silver coins or gold coins. Mm-hmm. Here's the note that you gave me, and the bank would be able to give them that money. Mm-hmm. But then, as soon as we started using credit, like, credit is not real money. It's an IOU. Mm-hmm. And I just think that caused so many problems. But let me just play this real quick. It kind of explains in a nutshell how the Fed works. Okay. And things that some folks don't know, there are Federal Reserve banks throughout the nation. There's one, mm-hmm. Like, the main Federal Reserve is in Washington, D.C., but then there's, I think, 12.
There's 12 total.
12 throughout the nation. Yeah. So let me go ahead and play this.
Okay.
US government issues Treasury bonds to the Federal Reserve. The Fed turns the bonds given to them into Federal Reserve notes, which are then traded into the banks who transfer them into paper notes, adding money to the US money supply, money that is imaginary. But the money doesn't stop there. Say the Fed gives the bank $10 billion. The bank must reserve 10% of that, but is allowed to use the excess to fund loans to the people of the United States. Say someone borrows this $9 billion, they would then deposit it back into the banks, restarting the cycle. 10% is kept, leaving 90% of that to loan out again. With the process repeating, 9 times the original loan is then created out of thin air.
So money is pretty much created out of thin air, and it grows exponentially with no logic behind it, except for the fact that other banks want to borrow money, and the banks above them that they can borrow from, which is the Fed, Federal Reserve banks throughout the nation, they can loan up to 90% of the fake money that the Federal Reserve gives them. And then the banks under that can do the same thing. They have to keep, what is it, 10%?
10%.
In reserve. And then the rest, 90% can be loaned out.
But they have we the people to pay the interest.
But the thing of it is, like, you go down how many banks, and that $9 billion is now times 9 banks is now $81 billion. It doesn't exist.
Fractional reserve banking. It's crazy.
It's a scheme, boy.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's definitely a scheme, but
it's a cartel.
Yeah. So just to touch on a little bit more history for a little bit of clarification. I touched on the fact that the banks had their own notes, and honestly, there were state banks, so there were like statewide notes, and sometimes you could use those in other states too. It just depended on the reputation of the bank that issued them, which is how it should be. Like, if banks aren't doing good business, then let them fail.
Right.
But anyway, but back in the 1800s, when we had one of the panics or runs on the bank, there was like a clearinghouse that stopped that from expanding throughout the nation, where they had a bunch of banks pool their money and their reserves. And these banks were members of this like clearinghouse, which is another word for centralized bank. But they pooled their money, and they used that money to basically bail out the banks that were failing. And do you remember in 2009 when we had like our big crash? They said the banks were too big to fail.
Right.
And then just recently, right, with that Valley, what is it? Silicon Valley Bank. Like, they're bailing them out, but there's other smaller banks that are failing, and they said they're not going to bail them out. So how do they pick and choose?
A lot of it's who they're affiliated with.
Yeah. But there's also after the 1907 panic and before the whole plans for Jekyll Island, there was legislation passed in Congress to form this committee to come up with a solution for our monetary problems. And I think that was a front too, just to like look good to the public that, hey, we're trying to figure out the problem. We don't want this to happen again. Anyway, it was called the Aldrich again, the Aldrich-Vreeland Act of 1908. So they created a national monetary commission, and their goal was pretty much just to study money problems and come up with a solution. And so that's kind of where the idea, and who knows who was all a part of that committee.
And how's it going?
who really pushed it. Yep. But Aldrich, his name keeps coming up.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he was a puppet or if I don't know.
Well,
Or if he was a driver.
married a Rockefeller and, the very powerful family.
Right. So who knows? Maybe the Rockefellers were the puppet masters and they were controlling the stuff that he did.
I'd be willing to bet.
Yeah. So that was, I think, just the only thing I wanted to add, because that was sort of a little gap that I forgot to bring up. But you're right, it's a cartel. I think it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do I have the Constitution? Actually, I don't, but I don't have it up on my browser. But basically, it's Article 1, Section 8 that talks about who is in control of our monetary system and our coins and all of that. And it's our Congress, So yeah, look up Article 1, Section 8. Okay. I think I'm going to do a companion Substack so I can put all the resources and sources of what we talked about in
Good
here.
idea.
Yeah.
Well, and it could be another episode, but the Act of 1871, which
that could
be. That's a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But it's a big one and it's important. So
Malaya says credit and interest is rooted in evil and enslaves those who are indebted to it. We are slaves. They are. You know what? This is definitely a master slave situation, even though it's not literal, like in chains, but we really are their servent. The banks own the government.
And absolutely.
It's supposed to be us that determine what the government should and shouldn't do, and we use our voting power. But honestly, it's the banks that pretty much rule the government. It is.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they definitely control the government. But yeah. So what is our next question?
Well, I actually, it's going to bounce around a little bit in history, but I had a question worth pondering, which is why do great men of history who oppose the central banking system end up assassinated or attempted?
Now that is a good question worth pondering.
I clicked it too fast. Sorry.
That's okay. No, and I just, to paint a picture, if you will, I just put a lot of information here that it's very interesting. And you ask, how could they do that? How could they let all that power go? And I think that there's bribery, there's blackmail, there's threats on people's lives, there are assassinations. I mean, all of the above, right? But I mean, Abraham Lincoln, these all are related to the central bank. So he printed the American greenback with zero inflation to help support the Civil War. And he planned on continuing. And the Rothschilds were really against it. And they were even supporting the South for a while. I mean, he just did not agree to anything that they wanted to do as far as loaning us money. And so he was assassinated. And it's always, it's a lone gunman, right? And like, that was upset about, the South. Anyway. And then we know about Andrew Jackson and what his attempted assassination. And then James Garfield said, whoever controls the volume of money in our country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. The entire system is very easily controlled one way or another by a few powerful men at the top. He was against the central bank. He was assassinated 2 weeks later.
Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't know that about Garfield. Wow.
Yeah. So when you speak out publicly against them, bad things happen. And then McKinley, he was pals with J.P. Morgan in his first term, and Morgan funded his run. And it allowed J.P. Morgan to create mergers and monopolies. But his second term, he had a change of heart, and he did the Gold Standard Act of 1900, which curtailed the printing of money to control inflation. and then he was assassinated. Okay, I mean it's pretty mind blowing. And then
It kind of sounds like people who speak out against the CIA,
yeah,
like JFK. I'm not going to get on that tinfoil hat subject, but
well,
it
I
seems
have
like
to listen.
anybody who's against the CIA or the banks is targeted.
Yeah, and so this, you're absolutely right. This guy, Louis T. McFadden, not a familiar name, but I bring him up because he had a banger of a speech in the House of Representatives.
Oh,
He was on the House Banking Committee from 1920 to 31, and in quote, "We have the most corrupt institutions the world has seen. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board. It has cheated the United States and the people out of enough money to pay the national debt several times over. This evil institution has impoverished and ruined the people of the United States and practically bankrupted our government through the defects of the law by the Federal Reserve Board and through corrupt practices of the moneyed vultures who control it."
it's so true.
And he was assassinated. Okay, but the rest of that speech, I mean, it's worth looking into because it is so powerful. And
I'm so going to dig into that speech, and I'm going to include it on our Substack. So
awesome. But okay, one more, JFK.
yeah,
So I knew he was trying to take us back to the silver standard, right? But he had passed an executive order, four ones and a zero, that gave our Treasury the authority to issue silver certificates to create our own money. And he was assassinated 6 months later.
well, and he also, right before he was assassinated, talked about the CIA and that he wanted to take them
Splintering,
down.
yeah, splintering it, yeah.
Mhm.
And his famous speech, infiltration, not invasion.
Yes.
I mean, that speech I just got chills thinking about it.
Mhm.
So should we mention the Titanic?
You can mention whatever you want, Carrie.
Well, I mean, put on my tinfoil hat, but I think okay. Three, let's just get to it. Three of the most vocal detractors of the central bank were also three of the most powerful men in the world at the time. We had Benjamin Guggenheim, we had Isidor Straus, we had John Jacob Astor, powerful and very, very vehemently against the central bank. They were invited by JP Morgan, who owned the Fleet Line, right? He was supposed to go. He had all his art and everything put on, his little assistant. They were going to get on the same morning, and they decided last minute not to go. Took all their art and luggage off, and we all know what happened. But those men all died, and then the central bank was formed. Soon after.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So I mean,
Wow, you did some major digging, didn't you?
well, I mean, a lot now. I mean, I've been reading a really fascinating book, but I've been fascinated with the Titanic for a long time, and I've watched a lot of documentaries, and just there's a lot to it.
There is. The Titanic is very interesting. When did that sink?
Oh my gosh, it was April 15th, 1912, right?
Look at the timing on that.
I know. That's why. I mean, it's always, you look at everything in that, with that perspective,
Mhm.
and it just kind of falls together, and it's
I forgot about the Titanic. I had that, I know that. And I see the connections
Mhm.
with all of this, but I completely forgot about that.
Yeah.
Good call out there, Carrie. I think it's definitely connected. I think, in my opinion, it's definitely connected.
I do. I think so too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, another just really quick history item is before we get on to our next thing, back in, and it's not in the 1800s. It's actually a pretty recent history. The House of Representatives in 2012 passed Federal Reserve audit because they're a private entity. They can't be audited by the government.
Right.
And so it was introduced by Ron Paul. Boy, that Paul family, they
Right.
go after the corrupt government, I tell you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it says HR 24, but that's not actually what the bill was. It was HR 459. The Federal Reserve Transparency Act of 2012. And it was introduced to the House, but it passed. But it never passed the Senate. What a shame.
Right.
Like, and I think they tried to bring up a similar act in like 2015, 2019. We absolutely should be auditing the Fed. I mean,
It'll be back.
what would be the reason for not? Like, why would anybody not vote for that? And why would any president veto that? Right?
Because they're getting paid or threatened not to, right?
I don't know.
But I think it's going to be back. I think that bill will come back.
Yeah. So I
At
just
some
wanted
point.
to share that info before we move on to, gosh, we're at 56 minutes. I wasted a couple minutes in the beginning because Rumble wasn't working, so I'm going to have to upload this to Rumble. But yeah, how has the Fed impacted society? I don't know if you have anything on this topic, Carrie.
I do. I mean, the obvious is it's undermined our sovereignty as well as the entire world's, because we've been in control. I mean, that's changing right now, right?
Yep.
But I mean, Winston Churchill, another great quote: "For any nation to have full sovereignty and independence, absolute control over the means it employs to exchange goods and services must reside with organs which represent the people and must not be delegated to private individuals." So, I mean, it's definitely undermined the sovereignty of all nations, and mostly ours. And then I just have a list of things like busts and booms and debased currency, wealth disparity, and the wars, the countless wars. Think about that, right? I mean, they loan to fight the war, they loan to rebuild. It's been said that every war since the Napoleonic to the Revolutionary were started against countries that had interest-free state banking systems. And I found this quote, you've probably heard it, by, I don't know if I say it correctly, Gutle Schnaper, the wife of a Mayor Amschel Rothschild, said before she died, "If my sons did not want wars, there would be none."
Ah, wow. Really?
Yeah.
That's an actual quote, huh?
That is a quote. And wars are bankers' wars. That's what.
They sure are. Can I just interrupt with a comment?
Yeah.
From YouTube. Thank goodness physical money reminds us who to trust in above all the evil and power that surrounds the dollar. And actually, wow, we've got that. I do. The evil and power that surrounds the dollar.
Oh.
What is with the symbolism on our money?
Right.
I mean, that could be a whole nother show, but I had this up.
Well, right. And then it reads U.S. Federal Reserve note. And before it was U.S. Treasury note.
Oh,
yeah.
When did that change? Do you know?
When the Fed took over Federal Reserve.
Oh, in 1911. Anyway, continue. I just wanted to put that YouTube comment out there.
Oh, great. So one of the other things I was thinking about too is how it has impacted our telling of history. And I happen to find a George Orwell quote from 1984. I have the book right over here.
We probably quote that book. We could quote that book in every one of our shows.
I hope I don't have too many quotes, but these are all very fascinating men. But he
I like it.
The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of history.
That's true.
And so we're seeing it today in our own education system, it's been corrupted, it's infiltrated, it's just sick. And so when you understand that, the globalists have their agenda, and it's very different from what our nation, the people want, and the great men of our nation. I remember someone asked, I can't remember who, but why do the Americans kill their greatest men? And we're not sick, it's like, that is crazy. We're not killing them. Our greatest men are seeking to serve the people the best way they can, and to make our nation stronger. And when we understand now that the globalists aren't interested in that, they're interested in their own power and their own agenda, and actually weakening our nation. And so that's what the battle has been since our very beginning.
Yeah, it has been. I know for me, when I think about society, I think about the fact that they have so much control over our economy and how that impacts society. So I look at it through the lens, I suppose, of the everyday person and how it impacts us.
Mhm.
For instance, we have all this inflation that's been happening, and in order to offset that inflation, the Fed raises interest rates.
Mhm.
And like today, right now, they're raising at a crazy level. It's not as big. I think that like sometime in the 80s, it might have been up to 15% or something. Um,
Mhm.
we're not that high, but at the same time, when we have inflation and everything's already so expensive, and there's big bubbles in the housing market, then you raise these interest rates, and it's like gets people to stop spending, like they can't afford to buy a house now. And
Mhm.
um, it's like they're playing. It's a game.
Yeah.
It's a game they play,
Oh,
and
yes.
it's like, why don't you just let us uh, let the ebbs and flows happen in the economy, based off of and then we can be more informed citizens too.
Mhm.
So if somebody makes a decision that impacts the economy, well, we want to see that. We don't want you playing with our fake money. It, whatever decisions they make can cause the deflation, inflation.
Mhm.
It can cause unemployment. They think the president has all this power to actually control that. It's really the Fed.
Mhm.
Um, yes, the president can make some pretty bad decisions to cause inflation to happen. I mean, look what's happened the last 2 years.
Mhm.
But at the same time, like the Fed, they have so much control for a private entity
Mhm.
that can impact the whole nation.
Mhm.
And you know, um, they can have more money printed,
Mhm.
but I feel like the Fed is, with some of the news that's been coming out lately, the Fed is going to sort of be no more, but it will be transitioned into something else. If you think about all the talk of the centralized digital currency,
Mhm.
and
Mm.
here I'll pull up my little central bank digital currency. I think that's where they want to send us.
But
And
would that be the Fed? Would the Fed not be in control of that? And I do have some thoughts.
yes, that's what central bank is. Central bank digital currency, not just digital currency. We're
Okay.
not talking Bitcoin here, which is private and independent. We're
Right.
talking centralized.
But
And
would
the
the Fed
scary
still
thing,
control
huh?
that? The Fed would still control it?
Well, that's what I think it's going to transform into, or try to.
Yeah,
And
we're for sure
the
gonna.
scary thing about that is it goes back to your Orwellian kind of thing, is if we no longer have cash, which actually cash is only 3% of the money now.
Hmm.
97% of all money is digital right now.
Mm.
But the Fed would if we had a centralized digital currency, they would be able to see every transaction we have. They would be able to flip our money on and off at the switch
Yeah.
of a button.
Yeah.
How, you would have no privacy as to
Yeah.
what you spend.
It has to be decentralized.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Oh, there's a comment. Let me just talk about more comments. So Malaya is my sister. She's on YouTube commenting. It's interesting though. She says, thank goodness physical money reminds us who to trust and above. Oh, I already read that one. She said, I know a Democrat that hopes Trump gets reelected to fix the economy.
He will.
I am not surprised by that.
100%.
Even
that's
with everything that's going on with him right now, with them going after him and arresting him. But yeah, the digital currency, I think that, the Fed already impacts society, but I think it's going to be, you ain't seen nothing yet if we go to digital.
Well, and so what about this theory? I have some questions. So
Do you have a question worth pondering, Carrie?
I do, and it's a little bit okay. Just consider it. So what is the actual question? I don't really know, but so we know Trump appointed Jerome Powell, right? He served under
Mhm.
Trump, and then Biden reappointed him, right? And Powell's an interesting guy, right? I mean, I'm not an expert. I'll say that right now, but
Let me look. I'm gonna do some live digging while you talk. Go ahead.
okay. So he held off raising the interest rates until Biden's admin. Remember? I mean, things were amazing under Trump. And his moves are hurting the deep state globalists right now. Okay. But the US dollar is getting stronger compared to the rest of the world's currency. We're actually at a 20-year high, the US dollar.
Hmm.
Right? But the petrodollar and that whole system of the world reserve currency that happened with Bretton Woods, remember in 1944 when we became the world reserve currency, the US dollar. But we have BRICS, and a lot of other countries are joining BRICS, and that is that's about trade, and that was the globalist main lever of control is the petrodollar. And so that's being dismantled as we speak, right? But our dollar is getting stronger. So I don't really think those countries are really against America, but it looks like to me they're against the globalists. And so,
are you talking about the BRICS countries?
yeah, BRICS,
Yeah,
and,
yeah. Mhm.
right? And so I'm just wondering, do you think that Powell is like purposely trying to destroy the Federal Reserve? Because I mean, we know we want it to be gone, and I imagine Trump would too. But I'm just saying, it's a thought. Could we still have some control there? And then remember when Trump in 2019 moved the Fed into the Treasury, and the news didn't even talk about it.
That is right. That was while Trump was president.
Yeah,
I forgot about that. Yes.
I don't hear
yes,
that
yes.
I didn't hear they moved it back out. It's like part of the Treasury.
I don't know about moving it into the Treasury.
Yeah, he moved it into the Treasury. And so what does that mean? Did that mean that our government is controlling it? And there's some kind of weird thing going on with Yellen?
Maybe there's something we don't know because
the
Treasury might be trying to take over the Fed.
Well, but Trump made it put it under the control of the US government. And then when the US government is in better hands, I think that could be a very good thing. And with the interest or the debt ceiling, I mean, just everything, I don't know. It just seems like something like that might be happening. Maybe I'm wishful thinking.
I think there's a lot we don't know that's happening in the background, but I do know, I think the Treasury was given the ability to print money. I didn't dig into that specifically, but I do recall that in 2020, I think that's when that happened, right?
Well, they print it, but they give it to the Fed, and then the Fed creates the Federal Reserve. Now, so
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what they're.
But I do know that I
Unholy
think the
alliance.
Treasury has more control than it had before.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's probably as a result of Trump moving it into the Treasury.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
really
I mean, think
interesting.
about the drastic change that took place with Powell between Trump admin and Biden. It's like there's something that we just don't know about.
I think there's some movement going on behind the scenes that we're
For
not
sure.
aware of.
For
I
sure.
do feel like things are going to work out fine.
I do too.
Even though they're so what the clarity of what I should have said around the digital, well, maybe I did, but that they're trying.
Mhm.
The ones that are for like the global economy versus um, you know, us staying an independent sovereign country,
Mhm.
uh, the globalists really would like to see a global digital
Of course, a
currency.
one world government. It's being completely dismantled.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and this is also really interesting too. What Trump did. Oh, did Malaya?
Yeah, she just said, I heard we're heading toward 100% digital currency and they will decide what we can and can't buy. I think they're going to try that. I don't
They'll
think they're
try.
going to be successful.
There's definitely a battle happening behind the scenes, but I don't think so either, Nats. I mean, there is digital currency already here, but I don't think it's going to be centralized like that. But I want to make an interesting point about history and
Yeah.
what Trump did, putting the Fed in the Treasury, and then let's go back to
I had
Caesar.
to pull up the debt clock while you talk.
Okay, do it. Yeah. I mean, it's not.
$31 trillion.
I mean, we should all have that up just to remind ourselves.
You know
But
that my mouth dropped open when we even had trillions of dollars, like
I
1
know
trillion.
it's madness. So it looks like they're racing headlong into a wall. I mean, what else could they never talk about balancing it, but anyway, so what Trump did by moving the Fed into the Treasury, just want to look at Julius Caesar, 52 BC.
That's
Okay.
so weird that you say that. I was just studying him.
Okay.
That is so weird you're bringing this up.
Okay, cool. Well,
Interesting.
share some things if it comes to your mind. But so you remember after he conquered Gaul, which is France, he became the leader of the Roman Republic. He was loved by the people, but he came back and it was just a mess. Rome with like homeless people. A lot of the peasants that had provided for the food production had been drafted. So Rome was in decline. Food production was in decline. They had to import food from North America. Or excuse me, North Africa. The usury by the elite was out of control. It was up to like 48% interest rates. Okay,
Holy,
so
48%.
Think about all that stuff. Like, can we relate? So this is 52 BC. So how did it happen? That's the QWP. How did this happen to a great nation?
Now that is a good question worth pondering.
The patrician elite obtained the privilege to mint their own silver coinage. Okay. And they simply stamped new values on their coins. So they were having a field day, right? And so when Caesar came back, he put in all of these social and monetary reforms. He restored property to the peasants, remissions on rent. He gave the soldiers a pay increase. He just really took care of the people, right? And monetary reforms came, and he decreased the state debt levels. The interest rate dropped to 1% max per month. Slavery was abolished as a means of debt settlement, and the aristocrats were made to invest their money, not hoard it. But here's the kicker. Ready? Control of the mint was transferred from the elite to the government. Boom.
Oh, really?
That's exactly what Trump did. And that is what got Caesar assassinated. Okay.
That is, yeah, what a parallel. That is really interesting.
So Trump is still standing, and he is standing. So,
that man must be divinely protected, because
right?
there are so many powerful people that are trying to take him down.
Yeah,
He's got to be super protected
Yeah.
right now.
absolutely. But I mean, this whole scheme, this whole method, it's old. It's old as time.
It is even before Christ, right?
I have a biblical perspective if we have time, but
Go
I mean,
for it, because I think we covered all of our questions.
okay. But just the ultimate demise of Rome is what they've been trying to do to us, right?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
always on the inside. It's the weak industrial base at home, incapable of providing enough manufactured goods. Remember, we shipped them all away. The rich continue their usury, the Federal Reserve, the bankers against the common man. The jury system then was abolished. Now ours is paid off and compromised, but right, they were importing slaves that outnumbered the citizens, and then we've had all this migration, like millions. And then this is interesting, and we can relate to this on some digs a friend of ours did. But 1/10 of the tithes to the church, instead of investing in the church, they sent it to the Vatican, and all the money was behind 20-foot walls, gold. Okay. And I don't know if it's still there. Some people allege that, Trump got it. I don't know. But anyway,
Well, he made a comment about,
we got it. Yeah, I think so.
About that.
Yeah. So I think we got our gold back, but because there was a lot of gold that just our taxpayers, our money just goes out to foreigners. But it's the same thing that they've been doing to us, and it's very old. All great empires fall from within, but we're waking up. So
We
right?
are. Well, Babylon is falling, and Babylon, I think, is the global elitist cabal, and I think they're going to come crashing down, and we're going to see a new day, a new brighter day.
I agree.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's ages old. It goes back to the Bible. Nehemiah struggled with it. The book of Nehemiah is about leadership. He went to rebuild the wall in Jerusalem, and then he became the governor. He was the cupbearer to the king of Persia, Judea at the time. But he created, or he became enraged against the elites for the same reason that Caesar did. And they had taken the land from the peasants, and anyway, but he made them all.
I mean, the parallels. I mean, I know this isn't about the Fed anymore, but honestly,
they do the same thing.
We're doing the same thing.
It is, and it just keeps failing over and over.
And I was just reading. I was just reading an article about how much land, like how they're probably going to go after the land so people can't own land eventually, but we'll see how they do that.
I'm just not worried. I mean, we know
I'm
that
not either. I'm pretty comfy, but you see the parallels and you see kind of what the Bible has forewarned about.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what's happening in our society. Just everything is upside down and inside out. And wrong is right, right is wrong. Yeah. Truth is lies, lies is truth. And every single area of our society is infiltrated with craziness. So,
and we know that it does get worse before the end times. But we don't know when that is, though, and God lives outside of time. So, I mean, I'm always optimistic that God is going to use what is happening now for the kingdom and to bring people. I mean, like that comedian, J.P. Sears, talked about, the further we recoil against the evil that we see in the world, the closer we actually get to Christ, to God, because now you can see a defining line between good and evil and the spiritual battle that is manifesting here. And it's for the souls of mankind. And I mean, that's what's going on. And so
for me, I I don't even call it end times. I call it renewed.
Mhm.
It's a new birth. It's a, I don't know. You know what? There's one thing I did want to show.
Okay.
uh, just because the little clip that I had talked about how I'm going back to the Fed now. How the Fed is a cancer, and this interviewer is asking this economist. The economist is Thomas Sowell. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, he's really interesting to listen
Yeah.
to. But this interviewer is saying, "Well, what do you replace it with?" And you got to hear Thomas's response. I want to play this quick before we close out.
Okay.
Is this the right one? Yeah, that's the right one.
Would you replace it with? How would the currency? How would the currency run?
We would replace it. We could replace it with what existed when it was created.
Which was the gold standard.
Well, maybe the gold standard, but maybe not. But there's no evidence that these. What would you replace it? Things always bother me. You know,
they do?
When someone removes the cancer, what do you replace it with?
Okay.
When someone removes a cancer, what do you replace it with? You don't.
Great.
You don't replace
great
it with.
comment.
I thought that was a really, I mean, it really makes you, that's a thing to ponder right there. It makes you think.
Yeah.
It's like, why does it need to be replaced? It doesn't.
We do not need a different kind of central bank.
Right.
A better one, a different one. We need to take care of our own currency, as do other nations.
So I thought that was good. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Because
No.
I kind of interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, you did not. It was awesome. You don't. You never do. It was
Oh.
great.
We went way over. We went an hour and 21. I think the first 5 minutes is a wash because I was having technical difficulties. For anyone watching this on Rumble, after I upload the recording, I apologize. The live stream wasn't working. I checked and the setup was correct. So I don't know what happened there, but we will get it on Rumble. Thanks for everything, Carrie. You had so many cool insights, things I hadn't heard before. So,
well, so did you. And this really can be several episodes. It's because there's so
we
much
could talk forever on this.
Yeah. And then the history around the world of central bank too, in Russia. I mean
Right. Like it existed long before we ever had a federal reserve.
We're just
long before we ever had a national bank. It was already in Europe. So
yeah. So anyway. Well, thanks, Naz.
Well, thank you, Carrie. I really had fun with you tonight. And I have to apologize to Moxie because we didn't mention she's not on here tonight. She's not feeling well, and we wish her,
better
speedy
soon.
recovery. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All righty.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Bye.
I can see clearly.